got time for a couple of quick questions. Brian?
Yeah, I just want to say there's actually quite a similarity between your model and the one I was referring to, which is the theory of science of gifts, which is 19th century, believe it or not. So we may have a sort of formalisation of this informal development. He had some sort of an interpretant which is related to your model and links science and their efforts.
Excellent. Percy's there.
Okay.
So how would you change that initial definition for your first slide? You said you thought it was very right and very wrong.
Instead of free will, I'd say inputs.
Okay, so but it was freely chosen, so you would say inputted?
Well, talk about interventions on this sort of story.
Yeah.
I like the idea of intervention, but just I mentioned that counterfactuals may be not hopeless, because in quantum mechanics we do not need miracles. In quantum mechanics usually we talk about results of experiment and they are not definite even without miracles, so we do not have to introduce miracles. And in this ABL context, I introduced time-symmetric counterfactuals. We don't have, now I'm not sure that this is what you necessarily like, but it's much more close to retrocausal than it's causal in two directions. So it's kind of symmetric, time-symmetric counterfactual.
That is very interesting. What I'm trying to get at here is a one direction backwards thing, so it's not going to go like that. Just by the way, if you have chance, like in quantum mechanics, then David Lewis says in order to get the same sort of story in a chancy world, David Lewis talks about using quasi-miracles, which are just chance events, in the same way as he uses miracles in order to get the same sort of story.
Peter?
So, you say you figure out what the inputs are. Those are your exogenous variables, right? And what do you? How do you figure that out? Well, the things you have direct control over, I guess. And I guess one of the things that superdeterministic theories call into question is whether you have direct control over the things you thought you had direct control over. So I mean, you get a plausibility argument. It's like, yeah, that's the case. So, is there anything more than the plausibility argument? Prima facie control is control.
Well, if you have two causal models, which satisfy the probability relations equally, so there's going to be no experimental way of picking between them, for example. So superdeterminism, retrocausation, let's say. Then one thing you can just say is, well, there are two models. And relative to this model, because causation is on this picture is relative to a model. On this model, you have retrocausation. On this model, you don't have retrocausation. And you don't have free will.
Right.
Rewrite that as in the way I suggested. And you can just stop there. But it does seem to me to be implausible to say that something that really ought to be thought of as an input, because I have control over it. And that is what I'm modelling. I'm modelling the way in which my control here plays out. It does seem implausible to go for superdeterminism rather than retrocausation. And so it's a lesser criteria for model choice, but nevertheless a reason that we can say this is better than that. Another way of putting that is superdeterminism violates free will, retrocausation doesn't, and I prefer to put it this way.
Just to give myself a finger up on this, and this will have to be the last question. I mean, it seems to me that one thing you could plug in nicely here is some of the things that Bell says in this context. Where Bell makes those remarks about how, well, you wouldn't have to choose the measurements you're saving yourself, you could use the Swiss National Lottery machine. What he's pointing out, in effect, put in this language, would be that if you want to replace this with a superdeterminist model where NB and MA are endogenous variables, the model is going to be general enough to include as intermediate endogenous variables things like the Swiss National Lottery machine as well as our brains. And so the models get rather complicated at this point. So that's an argument that you can use against that.
And another criteria is minimality, so that would then count in favour of retrocausality.
Yeah. Okay, please join me in thanking you.